Hey guys, you've come to the right place. This channel is all about exciting, entertaining, and engaging videos that will keep you hooked from start to finish. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on anything new.
I still remember the exact moment I decided to destroy the two people I loved most in the world. It wasn't when I found the messages. It wasn't when I watched the security footage. It was when my wife looked me in the eye over dinner, smiled at me the way she always did, and told me she'd spent the afternoon at her mother's house. I knew she hadn't. I knew exactly where she'd been, and I knew exactly who she'd been with. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 41 years old, and for the past 16 years, I worked as a senior network architect for a cybersecurity firm in Richmond, Virginia. I'm not the kind of man who stands out in a crowd. Average height, average build, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting me. But I've always had one gift that set me apart. I'm patient. I can sit with a problem for weeks, months, turning it over in my mind, examining every angle until I find the perfect solution. That patience served me well in my career. It served me even better in my revenge. I married my wife Rachel 12 years ago. We met at a friend's barbecue, and I remember thinking she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She had this laugh that could fill an entire room, the kind that made strangers smile. We dated for 2 years, got married at a small church in Henrico County, and built what I thought was a good life together. We bought a house on a quiet street in Glen Allen, a suburb north of Richmond. I made good money. She worked part-time as an interior designer. We talked about kids, but never quite got around to it. Looking back, maybe that was a sign. Then there was my best friend, Connor Shaw. Connor and I grew up on the same street in Mechanicsville. We played Little League together, survived high school together, were best men at each other's weddings. Connor ran a commercial painting company, Shaw's Premier Coatings, that he'd built from nothing into a business with 12 employees and city contracts. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, loud, good-looking, the kind of guy who owned every room he walked into. Women loved him. His first marriage lasted 3 years before his wife caught him with a neighbor. His second marriage made it to 18 months. Through it all, I stood by him. I lent him money during his divorces. I helped him land his first big contract by redesigning his company website. I trusted him completely. That was my mistake. It started on a Tuesday in March. I was working from home, troubleshooting a client's firewall configuration, when I noticed something odd on our home network. Rachel's phone had connected to our Wi-Fi at 1:47 p.m., which was strange because she'd told me that morning she was spending the day at her mother's house in Ashland, about 30 minutes north. I wouldn't have thought much of it. Maybe she'd come home to grab something, but when I checked the front door camera, I saw 2 cars in the driveway. Rachel's white Lexus and a dark gray Ford F-150 that I recognized immediately. It was Connor's truck. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Connor stopped by to pick something up. Maybe Rachel came home early and Connor happened to drop by. I rewound the footage and watched Connor pull into the driveway at 1:32 p.m. Rachel's car was already there. He walked to the side door, not the front door, and it opened before he knocked. I couldn't see who opened it because of the camera angle, but the door opened from inside. He went in. The door closed. I fast-forwarded. For the next 3 hours and 26 minutes, neither of them came out. At 4:58 p.m., Connor left through the same side door. He looked both ways down the street before walking to his truck. Rachel's car left the driveway 14 minutes later. That evening, Rachel came home around 6:30, carrying grocery bags. She kissed me on the cheek and told me about her day at her mother's house. Her mom was redecorating the guest bedroom, she said. They'd looked at paint samples all afternoon. She even showed me photos on her phone of different color swatches against her mother's walls. She'd prepared her story down to the details. She smiled at me with those brown eyes, and I smiled back, and something inside me went very cold and very quiet. I didn't confront her. A lesser man might have. A lesser man might have screamed, thrown things, called Connor, and threatened him. But I'm not that kind of man. I'm patient. And I needed to be sure. Over the next 3 weeks, I turned our house into a surveillance operation. I installed a hidden camera in the bedroom, disguised as a phone charger on the nightstand. I put a GPS tracker in a hollow space behind the dashboard panel of Rachel's car, a spot no mechanic would ever find unless they were looking for it. I set up a mirrored backup of her iCloud account on a separate device, which gave me access to every text message, every photo, every deleted conversation. What I found made me sick. The affair had been going on for 7 months. 7 months of my wife and my best friend meeting 2 to 3 times a week, always when I was at work or traveling for business. The messages were graphic and cruel. Rachel complained about our marriage, about our intimacy, called me boring and predictable. Connor made jokes about me, called me his backup plan because I always helped him financially. There was one message from Rachel that I read over and over until the words burned into my brain. Danny has no idea. He's so clueless, it's almost sad. Sometimes I feel guilty, but then I remember how alive you make me feel, and I don't care anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my home office in the dark, staring at the wall, and I thought about every option. Divorce was the obvious choice. I could hire a lawyer, present the evidence, and walk away with a favorable settlement thanks to Virginia's fault-based divorce laws. But that felt insufficient. Rachel would be embarrassed, sure, and Connor would lose a friend, but they'd still have each other. They'd still have their lives. After everything they'd done, after every lie, every betrayal, every joke at my expense, I wanted them to truly understand what it felt like to lose everything. That's when I started planning. I spent 2 months preparing. Every detail had to be perfect, because one mistake would unravel the entire thing. I continued acting like the oblivious husband. I smiled at Rachel. I had beers with Connor on weekends. I watched them exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking, and I cataloged every single one. The first thing I did was consult a divorce attorney in secret. I met with Ellen Vasquez at her office in downtown Richmond, presented my evidence, and filed for divorce under seal. The paperwork would sit with the court until I was ready to activate it. Ellen looked at me with concern and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. I don't think she believed me. Next, I started moving money. Over 6 weeks, I transferred funds from our joint accounts into a new account Rachel didn't know about. I did it slowly, $300 here, $500 there, amounts small enough that she wouldn't notice. By the end, I'd moved just over $47,000. I also cashed out my $401k, paying the early withdrawal penalty without hesitation. Some things are worth more than money. The technical preparation was the most complex part. Using my professional skills, I created a series of digital breadcrumbs that would lead investigators on a very specific path. I cloned Connor's phone remotely, something that's disturbingly easy when you have physical access to someone's device for 3 minutes, which I got when he left it on my kitchen counter during a Sunday football game. With the clone, I could send texts from his number, access his email, and most importantly, log into his business accounts. Here's what I did, step by step, over the course of several weeks. First, I used Connor's cloned phone to send a series of emails from his business account to a competitor, offering to share client lists and proprietary bid information in exchange for a finder's fee. I made the emails convincing but not perfect, the kind of thing that would look damning under scrutiny but also slightly amateurish, exactly like something Connor would write. Second, I created a fake email account that mimicked one of Connor's subcontractors and used it to submit inflated invoices to 2 of his city contracts. The invoices were paid automatically through his accounting system, which I'd accessed through the cloned phone. The overcharges totaled just under $30,000, enough to trigger a fraud investigation, but not enough to raise immediate red flags in his accounting. Third, and this was the part I'm least proud of, I planted physical evidence. One evening when Connor was at a bar, I tracked his phone, I drove to his office in Sandston, used the spare key he kept under a fake rock by the back door, I'd known about it for years, and placed a folder in his filing cabinet. Inside the folder were printed copies of the emails to the competitor, handwritten notes calculating the inflated invoices, and a burner phone I'd purchased with cash 6 weeks earlier. The burner phone contained text messages I'd fabricated between Connor and the fake subcontractor, discussing the kickback scheme. Fourth, I made an anonymous tip to the Richmond City Inspector General's office, reporting suspicious billing irregularities in Shaw's Premier Coatings city contracts. I made the call from a payphone in Petersburg, 40 minutes south of Richmond, wearing gloves and a hat pulled low. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, city auditors had flagged the inflated invoices. Within a month, they'd subpoenaed Connor's business records. When investigators searched his office and found the folder I'd planted, along with the emails on his business server, the case practically built itself. Connor was arrested on a Wednesday morning in October, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and bid rigging on government contracts. His bail was set at $75,000. His assets were frozen pending investigation, which meant he couldn't pay it. He sat in Richmond City Jail for 11 days before his cousin scraped together enough for a bail bondsman. When Rachel called me crying about Connor's arrest, I played the concerned friend perfectly. I said all the right things, there must be some mistake. Connor would never do something like this. We should help him however we can. Inside, I felt nothing but ice. But I wasn't done. The morning after Connor's arrest, I activated the divorce filing. Rachel was served papers at our house by a process server while I was conveniently at work. The grounds cited were adultery, and the filing included excerpts from their text messages, timestamps from the GPS tracker, and still frames from the bedroom camera. I had already moved my personal belongings to a furnished apartment in Short Pump that I'd been renting for 2 weeks under my LLC. Rachel called me 47 times that day. I didn't answer once. I sent her a single text message that evening. You'll hear from my attorney. What happened next was something I'd anticipated but hadn't fully prepared myself for emotionally. Rachel, desperate and panicking, did exactly what I predicted. She went to Connor. But Connor, facing federal fraud charges and a potential 15-year sentence, was in no position to support anyone. His lawyer had told him to cut off all contact with anyone who might complicate his case. When Rachel showed up at his door crying, he turned her away. She told me this later, through her attorney, as if it would make me feel sorry for her. It didn't. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. Virginia's fault-based system worked in my favor exactly as Ellen Vasquez had predicted. Rachel got almost nothing. The house was sold, and after the mortgage was paid off, my share went directly into my new account. Rachel moved back in with her parents in Ashland at 39 years old, jobless and broke. Connor's criminal trial began in January. His court-appointed attorney, he couldn't afford a private lawyer after his assets were frozen, did his best, but the evidence was overwhelming. The emails were on his server. The invoices were processed through his accounts. The folder was in his filing cabinet. The burner phone was found in his office. His own employees testified that he'd been acting strangely for months, taking private calls and being secretive about finances. The prosecution painted a picture of a man whose lifestyle exceeded his means and who'd turned to fraud to keep up appearances. Connor took the stand in his own defense. He swore he'd never sent those emails, never created those invoices, never seen that folder before. He told the jury someone must have set him up. When the prosecutor asked who would do such a thing and why, Connor hesitated. Then he said my name, Daniel Mercer, my former best friend. He found out I was having an affair with his wife, and he did this to destroy me. The courtroom went quiet. The prosecutor asked if Connor had any evidence to support this claim. Connor said no, he didn't have evidence, but it was the only explanation that made sense. The prosecutor smiled and said, "So your defense is that a network architect, a man with no criminal record, no history of violence, and no apparent motive beyond a divorce that was already settled, orchestrated an elaborate fraud scheme, planted physical evidence in your office, manipulated your business accounts, and deceived federal investigators, all as revenge for an extramarital affair?" Connor stared at him and said, "You don't know Danny. You don't know what he's capable of." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Connor guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His painting company was dissolved. His house was seized. Everything he'd built over 20 years disappeared in a single afternoon. I watched the verdict from the back row of the courtroom. When the foreman said guilty, I felt a surge of something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite emptiness. It was more like the feeling you get when you finish a long, difficult project, a kind of tired relief. After the sentencing, I drove to my apartment, packed 2 suitcases, and went to the airport. I had a one-way ticket to Denver, Colorado, where I'd already secured a remote position with a different cybersecurity firm. I'd found an apartment near Sloan's Lake, with mountain views. I'd opened new bank accounts, registered a new LLC, and set up a life that had nothing to do with Richmond or Rachel or Connor or any of it. For the first year, I heard nothing. I worked my new job, explored Colorado, started hiking on weekends. I grew a beard. I adopted a dog, a black lab mix I named Scout. I didn't think about Rachel or Connor most days. When I did, the memories felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Then, 14 months after I left Virginia, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. When I did, a woman's voice asked if I was Daniel Mercer. I said I was. She introduced herself as Margaret Holm, an attorney with the Virginia Innocence Initiative. She said she was reviewing Connor Shaw's case and asked if I would be willing to answer some questions. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I'd prepared for this possibility. I told her I'd be happy to help in any way I could, and I meant it, because I knew there was nothing to find. Every digital trace I'd created pointed away from me. The cloned phone had been destroyed. The payphone in Petersburg had no cameras nearby. The spare key was back under Connor's fake rock. My home network logs had been scrubbed clean months before anyone thought to look at them. Margaret Holm asked me standard questions: my relationship with Connor, the timeline of events, whether I knew anything about his business dealings. I answered honestly where I could and vaguely where I couldn't. She thanked me for my time and said she'd be in touch if she needed anything else. She never called again. 6 more months passed. I started dating a woman named Julie who worked at a bookstore near my apartment. She was kind and quiet and laughed at my terrible jokes. I told her I was divorced but kept the details vague. She didn't press. I was starting to think I might actually be happy. Then one Saturday morning in April, I was drinking coffee on my balcony when my phone buzzed with a news alert from a Richmond news station I'd never gotten around to unsubscribing from. The headline read, Shaw conviction under review after new digital evidence surfaces. I set my coffee down and read the article. A cybersecurity expert hired by the Innocence Initiative had analyzed the metadata on the emails sent from Connor's account and found anomalies suggesting they were sent from a device that wasn't Connor's usual phone or computer. The expert couldn't identify which device had been used, but the timestamp patterns were inconsistent with Connor's known location data. It wasn't enough to overturn the conviction, but it was enough for a judge to order a full forensic review of all digital evidence in the case. I read the article 3 times. Then I went inside, sat on my couch, and thought very carefully for a very long time. Here's the thing about digital forensics that most people don't understand. It's not like physical evidence. You can wipe a hard drive, destroy a phone, delete every file, and a good forensic analyst can still find ghosts in the machine. Metadata lives in places you don't expect. Server logs, ISP records, cell tower pings, router cache files that survive factory resets. I'd been thorough, but I'd also been working alone, without the resources of a federal investigation behind me. The question wasn't whether they could find something. The question was whether what they found would lead back to me. I spent 3 days running scenarios in my head. The worst case was that they'd trace the cloned phone's activity to a device on my home network, match the timing to periods when I was home, and build a circumstantial case. It would be thin, no direct evidence, no confession, no witness, but combined with Connor's testimony about my motive, it might be enough for a new trial. And if Connor got a new trial with this information, the whole narrative would shift. He'd no longer be a corrupt businessman. He'd be the victim of an elaborate frame job by a vindictive ex-husband. The jury would eat it up. I thought about running. I had the money and the skills to disappear completely. New identity, new country, a life off the grid. But running would be an admission of guilt. And more importantly, it would mean giving up Julie and Scout and the quiet life I'd built in Denver. I wasn't willing to do that. So I did something I never expected to do. I called Ellen Vasquez, my divorce attorney in Richmond, and asked her to recommend a criminal defense lawyer. She was quiet for a long time before she said, "Daniel, what did you do?" I told her I'd rather not discuss it on the phone. She gave me a name. The criminal defense attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Owens, flew to Denver to meet me in person. We sat in my apartment and I told her everything, all of it. The surveillance, the cloning, the planted evidence, the anonymous tip, every single step of my plan. She listened without interrupting, took no notes, and when I finished, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You understand that if any of this comes to light, you're looking at federal charges, fraud, obstruction of justice, making false statements, possibly conspiracy. We're talking about a potential sentence longer than what Connor received." I told her I understood. She asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted to know my options. Patricia laid them out plainly. Option 1. Do nothing and hope the forensic review didn't find anything conclusive. Option 2. Cooperate with the review, get ahead of it, and negotiate the best possible outcome. Option 3. Leave the country. I chose option 2. Not because I felt guilty, I want to be clear about that. Even now, sitting here, I don't feel guilty about what I did to Connor Shaw. He took my wife. He laughed about me behind my back. He sat at my dinner table and drank my beer and shook my hand while sleeping with the woman I loved. Everything that happened to him was a consequence of his own choices. But Rachel was different. Rachel had already suffered. She'd lost her home, her marriage, her dignity. She hadn't gone to prison, but she'd been punished enough. And the forensic review might pull her back into the spotlight, drag her through the mud again, and I didn't want that. Despite everything, I didn't want that. Patricia negotiated for 3 weeks. The deal she worked out was this. I would provide a full written confession detailing exactly how I'd framed Connor. In exchange, the prosecution would recommend a reduced sentence and allow me to plead to a single count of obstruction of justice. Connor would be released immediately. My confession would be sealed from public record, though Connor and Rachel would be informed of the general circumstances. I signed the plea agreement on a Thursday afternoon in Patricia's Denver office. Then I went home, took Scout for a long walk around the lake, and watched the sun set behind the mountains. Julie came over that evening, and I told her everything. She cried. Then she held my hand and said she didn't know what to say. I told her she didn't have to say anything. She left around midnight and I never saw her again. Connor Shaw was released from federal prison on a Thursday morning, 22 months into his 12-year sentence. I know this because Patricia sent me the notice. He'd served almost 2 years for a crime that never happened, in a prison where he'd been assaulted twice and lost 30 pounds. His business was gone. His reputation was destroyed. The state offered him compensation, I don't know how much, but I know it wasn't enough. I was sentenced 2 months later. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Chen, looked at me over her glasses and said she'd never seen a case quite like mine. She called my actions extraordinarily calculated and said the premeditation involved was deeply troubling. She sentenced me to 4 years in a federal minimum security facility in Littleton, Colorado. I'm writing this from that facility now. I've been here for 11 months. The days are long and monotonous, but I have access to the library and I've read more books in the past year than in the previous decade. Scout is with a neighbor who promised to take good care of him until I get out. Patricia tells me I'll likely serve 3 years with good behavior. Last week, I received a letter. It was forwarded through my attorney, with no return address. The handwriting was Rachel's I'd know it anywhere, that slanted cursive she always used for birthday cards and grocery lists. The letter was short, just a few lines. Daniel, I heard what you did, all of it. I spent 2 years blaming myself for everything that happened to us, to Connor, to our life. Now I know it was you. I keep trying to understand how the man I married could be capable of something like this. I keep looking for the Daniel I fell in love with somewhere inside the person who destroyed 3 lives over wounded pride. I can't find him. I don't think he exists anymore. Maybe he never did. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for, because I know now that I'll never find mine. Don't write back. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the small box under my bunk where I keep my important things. A photo of Scout, my mother's rosary. A postcard from Denver that Julie sent me the week after my sentencing, with no message, just her name. Sometimes at night, when the block is quiet and the lights are off, I lie on my bunk and think about whether I'd do it all again. The honest answer is, I don't know. The revenge was perfect. Every piece fell exactly where I intended. Connor lost everything. Rachel lost everything. And in the end, so did I. 3 lives burned to the ground over something that started with a truck in a driveway on a Tuesday afternoon. But here's what I keep coming back to, the thing that sits in my chest like a stone I can't swallow. Rachel's letter said I destroyed 3 lives over wounded pride. She's wrong about that. It wasn't pride, it was love. Twisted, broken, poisoned love. But love all the same. I loved her so much that when she betrayed me, the love didn't disappear. It just changed shape. It became something sharp and patient and merciless, and I followed it all the way to the end. I have 2 years and 1 month left on my sentence. When I get out, I'm going back to Denver. I'm going to pick up Scout, find a new apartment, and start over. I won't contact Rachel. I won't look up Connor. I won't try to rebuild what's been destroyed. Some things, once broken, stay broken. And some men, once they've crossed a certain line, can never find their way back to the other side. I know this because I'm one of them.